is here. It's really to understand what you're thinking and whether we're being bold enough and whether you're taking on board the kind of scale of disruption, what you're taking away. Does anyone want to come in at the moment? Please. I need to hear from you as much as you hearing from me, because I'm not, please. Can the microphones wake up, please? Anyone else? Okay, please, what's your view? Because I tell you what my impression is from yesterday, that you're not really even navigating the waters. What you're doing is you're charting the waters. And I was struck by the lack of engagement, because I think a lot of the audiences in all three auditoriums are actually listening and digesting and ingesting the scale of disruption that we all face. Please, anyone else want to come in? Get the microphone, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Nadia Fatasi. I'm a former NATO dinosaur, so I spent 20 years.
What's a NATO dinosaur?
I spent nearly 2 decades in NATO, so I just recently...
Doing what?
I was a senior executive coordinator at the NATO Communications and Information Agency. But we organized the side event yesterday on cyber crisis simulation exercises. So we designed 4 disruptive teams. And what was interesting, I think, how to implement human resilience. So how to help implement inclusive collaborations in times of crises. And it was very interesting to see yesterday people from the NGOs, private sector, public sector, and policymakers coming together and really leveraging their cognitive and emotional intelligence to build the human resilience and navigate disruption. So in our views, I believe, how do you exercise not only in the sense of military exercises, of operational exercises, but human collaboration at the strategic level as well.
Do you think there's an awareness of just how the scale of disruption is increasing incredibly quickly?
I think there's an awareness at the conscious level, but I don't think there's an awareness on the difficulties that come when you work together from different sectors and different cultures, etc. So I think more emphasis should be in implementing this diverse collaboration.
All right. Some of you were here yesterday. Let's try and use a word cloud if you want to. I'd be interested in the kind of words which are on your mind as you think about disruption. So please use Slido and give us some of your ideas. I know that it's a small gathering at the moment, but it's helpful because the kind of things that came through yesterday about particularly corruption and hate and populism were really important to understand. Anyone else want to come in at the moment about the kind of things that you learned and are picking up? Or are you still in receive mode on this? Please, and as I say, we've only got about 10 minutes left, so please put your hand up. This is about making sure you all understand the kind of level of anxiety that there is out there. Please, and introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Peter Osuski, member of Slovak Parliament and head of OEC Parliamentary Assembly delegation. Generally said, the public in all levels is always skeptical to the power and potence of politics to do something for this or that. But in fact, the main problem is, in my eyes, that the politicians sell the future for the votes of today. And if we have problems, for example, with enough investments into defense, what we heard yesterday from our president, it's again because the politicians know that to invest in defense, if there is a clear and present danger like Russia in Europe, it's not very popular. And that's why they somehow prefer to do something for the people instead of doing what is necessary.
Didn't the election of your new president sort of begin to suggest a different way forward there?
Of course, the role of Slovak president is not of great importance.
Yeah, but it is an expression of public feeling.
Yes, but the previous president was at least as good as the new lady president will be. So generally, these are first two presidents in the history of Slovakia that are really good.
All right. Anyone else want to come in, particularly on the ability of leadership to handle this? Because this came out yesterday several times, including on the rules-based system, about whether leadership can handle this and what leadership has to do. And who wants to become a leader these days in this environment? Anyone want to come in? Well, you've come here. I'm trying to encourage you to have a view. All right, in that case, I'm not going to tell you other things that have taken place yesterday. Let's look at a video trying to capture the spirit of yesterday. And we have another 10 minutes before Sakya is here. Please, Simon, run it.
Business interests are much more committed to being global than national political interests sometimes.
By the way, I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, making money and doing the right thing for the society. I actually think the smart companies are doing exactly that.
When we're facing an existential threat from climate disruptions, how do you make this into an opportunity?
If we don't stop the climate change, they're going to keep moving. That's a natural human reaction for survival.
There's a whole bunch of new leaders coming in right now, so I hope that the best people will take the positions of responsibility and that there will be willingness to work together to take that responsibility.
When the state is not there, you have someone willing to push aside the state and replace it.
If we're going to be effective in this much more complicated world that we face, we need all the allies and partners we can find, particularly in other regions.
So that's just capturing an enormous number of great contributions, but this sense really that there's been a lot of transmission from here about the kind of scale of challenges, particularly for leadership. The end of the rules-based system, but what is replacing it? The issues of whether the corporate system can handle this, and that came out yesterday about how business handles a lot of the challenges that there are. And a point certainly which came out is whether actually those in positions of power and responsibility are the right people to be there now, given, and particularly picking up on your point from Slovakia here about whether they are the right people to actually be in leadership. Anyone else like to come in, please? No one. Yes, please. We've got 10 minutes, 8 minutes to run before Sakya is here, please.
Yeah.
Is it John again?
Yes, it is.
Okay, hi.
Sorry.
Anyone else want to come in? Let's get the microphones moving. Don't apologize. I'm delighted to see you, John.
Okay, nice to see you. I think that what we're imagining now and what I see in the field around the world is that what they would say in China is heaven is high and the emperor is far away. And there are many places around the world where there is crisis and there is no one there to lead. And so it falls to the people to act. And what I think this requires is collaborative inquiry.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
collaborative inquiry, what does that mean?
I think we're probably using education to socialize rather than giving the right skills for problem solving and teamwork. And what we need to do is not define the curriculum as much as put the problem out and let it be solved by collective intelligence. So I think we see this in ecology, that the mushrooms are communicating. We should be at least as intelligent as the mushrooms.
Let me put a challenge to you. We're going to do this again tomorrow morning as well, about something that General John Allen, who said right at the beginning of the video yesterday morning, he said, there are very few bright lights out there. And what I said to GLOBSEC and to Alex and Robert and others, I said, what you've got to do is have at least a sense of positiveness coming from the conference. In other words, not just the scale of disruption, but what can be done as a way forward, how people can thrive on change, how people can be emboldened. Anyone want to come in on, let's look forward. Is there a way in which you can move, and others out there can move in a very positive way to address this, particularly this pushback we're seeing from the public, whether it be populism or something much broader than that? Anyone else? We've got 7 minutes to go. Anyone else would like to come in, please? It's an idea-free area, this. Please, yes.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Emma Grajcarova. I'm from Ministry of Finance in Slovakia, but today I would
You
like
asked a question yesterday, didn't you?
No, I didn't.
Oh, yeah,
I
remember, Emma G.
Emma G, yeah. It's
Yeah.
shorter than, yeah. So we spoke a lot about young generation also yesterday, and
Yep.
I think today it's going to come out. And when you ask about the future and the looking forward, and I felt that this is the right time to maybe speak for the young generation here. I'm just graduated recently, so what I think that my generation is kind of tackling or thinking about a lot is, yes, there are a lot of like bright lights or like looking forward and stuff like that, but there is this huge...
There are a lot of bright lights.
Yes, there are, I think so. And also a lot of the young generation, like the young people are trying to take this leadership and trying to, you know, educate themselves and do all this stuff we were talking about yesterday. But I think, and also I wrote this yesterday when you asked for this cloud, these words, I think the polarization is like such a huge thing. I always find myself being in this kind of society or this kind of circle of elites and people who are like kind of similar mindset, and I feel like, oh my God, this world is going to such a great place for my future generation. And then I go home to the east of Slovakia and I speak to my classmates from high school or from the primary school, and I find myself in the reality, and I find myself like, if we don't go back to the people, if I put it this populist way, I think that we'll find ourselves in this huge bubble where we think that the world is like going somewhere, but it might actually we can find ourselves that it's going some other way. We had these, you know, polls before the election at the high school, and if you know how they would end up, like the extremists would be, I think, the second strongest party. They will have much more extremist politicians in the European Parliament if only high school students could vote.
Well, Simon, can we put up the previous word cloud from yesterday, just to remind everyone, or certain people who weren't here, what the view was in the group. We've got 3 minutes to run, but I'd like to pursue that, because I'd like to put to all of you, particularly based on our Thinking the Unthinkable work, and you can see we're one of the content partners, that actually the next generation is still not being adequately addressed. And particularly this is going to become a very, very serious problem on climate change, that the world leaders are not prepared to understand the enormity of frustration, anxiety, and determination. And when Timothy Garton-Ash yesterday quoted the Anthropocene challenge now, which is coming from the Potsdam Institute, and the speed at which we're facing the climate change problem, I think it's going to be a very, very serious problem for the current generation of leaders who think that somehow it won't happen on their watch. Is that what you're saying, what you're thinking, and what you're reflecting from Eastern Slovakia?
Yeah, and also I'm quite surprised how many young people, they have strong opinions, like we shouldn't forget about it. But these strong opinions, I think that they are, how they are trying to reflect them, they are easily being caught up by this extremists or by the side we don't really want to go the way. So I think that we really should focus on the young generation. Okay, we spoke about education and everything, but maybe also kind of reflect on all, and I'm also trying to do this and at the Ministry of Finance to kind of explain my work to the younger generation, because once they feel they are not being heard up there in the elites, in the government, they are easily being caught up by those who think, how they are trying to look that they are listening to them, and that's our extremists in our Slovak case.
Anyone else like to come in on this? Again, I'm going to keep pressing you. We've got about 3 minutes to run before Sakio's here, and he will be challenged by Robin Shepherd on the kind of things that are really facing him as the Supreme Allied Commander, and also NATO. But there are a lot of things which are threatening at the moment, and I was very struck by a 48-year-old chief executive of a very large corporation, who, when it comes to the kind of disruptive threats coming down the track, particularly from further east, whether Russia or China, he said, I don't understand those kind of things. I never lived through the Cold War, so why should I understand it now? I found that deeply scary. Please.
Samuel Urbanski here with the Young Leaders Forum.
Are we reflecting the kind of concerns from the Young Leaders Forum?
Well, I would not like to speak on behalf of the group, but I would just like to echo Emma's words that this is absolutely the thing. We have plenty of ideas, and for example, on climate change, we see politicians reflecting on it, we see the elites reflecting on it, but in their speeches, not in their actions. And that I think we need more of, because maybe I'm a bit more optimistic than Emma in that the concerns of the young people are being heard, but they're not being acted upon. And I think that's perhaps even more concerning than just not being heard at all.
Do you think the current generation of leaders, and obviously that's a very general term, can actually handle the scale of disruption? We are talking about navigating disruption, but I said, I don't know if you were here at the beginning, we're still in the business of charting disruption, understanding where the shoals are, where the rocks are, understanding what lies ahead as we try to navigate the waters.
My generation of leaders, absolutely. We have some of the brightest minds among ourselves, and the access of information we have thanks to interconnectedness around the world allows us to kind of grow our knowledge and exchange and talk about things, but I don't think that is the issue. I think navigating the disruption and kind of finding a clear picture, we can do that, but we also need to act upon that, and I think that is the more important question.
Right. Please, let's keep this momentum going for another couple of minutes.
Yeah, Patricia Hominska, also GLOBSEC Young Leaders Forum. I just wanted to ask and add to what Samuel said about disruption and how we are navigating it. This is the issue that our generation was brought up in a disrupted world. This is something normal to us. We are not...
You have normal disruption.
Exactly. We basically assess it every day. We have to deal with it every day. And this is something that we're feeling more natural than if we don't have disruption at all.
But does that mean you think that the current generation of leaders, whether political or corporate, can't handle it because they're not used to it?
Oh no, they can, but they have to actually overcome more obstacles to actually handle it. They have to evolve. We are the part of the evolution that already happened.
Okay, certainly our findings from Thinking the Unthinkable are that the conformity which qualifies leaders for the top disqualifies them from understanding the scale of disruption and the enormity of what they have to challenge. And I can see several of you nodding agreement. Anyone else want to come in? We're going to do this again tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So if you can, please do come again. Let's keep this momentum going forward. Anyone else want to come in, please? Well, look, enjoy navigating disruption, or at least charting disruption. I was very struck, if I may, as an introduction to our next guest, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. It's his first public appearance since taking over command within the last month. The General Sir Nick Carter, who's the Chief of Defence in the United Kingdom, on D-Day yesterday wrote in the Times about the threats which are out there of disruption. He said, "What should we learn from D-Day? I'm in no doubt that the strategic context is more dynamic, complex and unstable than it has been at any time since D-Day. Threats to our way of life and our interests are diversifying, proliferating and intensifying very rapidly. Our competitors have become masters at exploiting the seams between peace and war." So there's a context which is frankly deeply scary out there. Let me now introduce Robin Shepherd with the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Todd Waters. And if you can tomorrow, come back at the same time. Morning, General.
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. Are you handing me the...
Yes, I'll give it to you.
Yes. Sorry, General, please sit down. Thanks. Good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be back at GLOBSEC. My name is Robin Shepherd. I'm the Vice President of the Halifax International Security Forum, which is North America's leading foreign affairs and defense conference. GLOBSEC is by far and away Central and Eastern Europe's leading foreign affairs and defense conference, and I really want to take this opportunity to congratulate Rastio Kacer, Robo Vash, Milan Salor for everything they've done over, I think, the past 14 years. It's a tremendous achievement. Just before I get to our guests this morning, I just want to remind you of a few housekeeping things. We're already a day old into GLOBSEC now, so you know what Slido is. Slido is something you can use to pose questions. That doesn't mean I'll refer to them. It does mean I have the option. And likewise, we'll come to questions at a certain point in this discussion. And everybody always says this, but please be disciplined about this. Keep your questions to certainly no longer than 30 seconds. And don't forget to introduce yourself. At the end of this session, we'll move straight into the next one. And General Walters will be in attendance, and he may even ask questions and reverse the roles. So this will be an interesting dynamic. So it's my great pleasure to welcome General Todd Walters, who is the newly appointed Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, NATO, and simultaneously Commander of US European Command. Congratulations on the on the new job. I wanted to start out because it's in international security, as in the politics of our democracies, people are always talking, and rightly so, about a disconnect with the public. And I think it's now more widely understood than perhaps it once was, that it is vital to keep the public on side. So I'm going to start out with something very straightforward, perhaps to you, but maybe not to everybody even in this audience. The world is full of these bewildering acronyms and job titles, but if we're going to keep the public on side, we do need to actually have some clarity. So before we go any further, could you tell us who and what exactly you command?
Thanks, Robin. And first, I'd like to also extend my thanks to Ambassador Katcher and Robert Voss for the opportunity to spend some time with you. I currently serve as the Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, and in my second hat, I serve as the United States European Commander. So if you will, I bear the responsibility from a Allied command operations standpoint to be in charge of operational engagement with all of the forces that represent NATO that wear the military uniform. And from a United States perspective, I bear the responsibility to serve as the lead military entity on the European continent that represents the United States military. That all sounds pretty simple. The great news is it's a little bit complicated. The better news is if you think you have a hard time getting inside of our decision loop because we have a misunderstanding of what we do, if you could imagine if there is an enemy of NATO or an enemy of the United States, they're probably very, very confused about our architecture because we don't share it with them. And I say that jokingly, but it certainly serves as a PowerPoint, if you will, for our capabilities. And I'll extend my conversation for just a second about my NATO responsibilities. In NATO, I serve as the operational commander for a numerous set of commands, some geographical and some that are domain-oriented. As you could expect, I have an organization that serves under my command that represents the air domain. It is called NATO AirCom. I have one that represents the land domain. It is called NATO LANDCOM. I have one that represents the maritime domain. It's called NATO MARCOM. And we have a NATO SOF headquarters that actually serves administratively with us in our headquarters in Mons, Belgium. We also have joint forces commands that regionally cover the European continent. There is a joint forces command that exists in the northeastern side of Europe that bears the responsibility of focusing day in and day out on the activities in the northeastern sector of the European continent. It's called Joint Forces Command Brunson. And we also have a Joint Forces Command that focuses on the southeastern side of the European continent, and that's Joint Forces Command Naples. And through recent changes and an improvement in our posture, we just embraced another Joint Forces Command, and it's called Joint Forces Command Norfolk. And its focus is from the center of the Atlantic Ocean, extending all the way to the coast of the western portion of the continent of Europe. So these are just some of the commands that I have the opportunity to serve over. But if you could imagine, day in and day out, if the NATO Secretary General says to himself, we need to get done something with our NATO militaries, I will go to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe to execute those tasks. And if our United States President says he wants to get done from a U.S. military perspective with respect to activities on the European continent, with respect to the United States, he will come to our headquarters, which is U.S. European Command. So, Robin, I hope that clarifies, but I can tell even saying that it's reasonably complicated. It seems very, very comfortable to me, but it's a fantastic opportunity to be at 70,000 feet and be in charge of the militaries that represent NATO and also the militaries that represent the United States. And there are many opportunities because of the perch that I sit on to find ways to share some of those resources.
Absolutely. I mean, thanks. And you know, the fact that things are not always immediately obvious does not mean there's something wrong with them. There are complexities. This is not, a military. It's interesting as a former pilot, you talk about looking at it from 70,000 feet. The question of, and you mentioned also the question of capability. We're 5 years, almost 5 years, since the Wales NATO summit, which was kind of a landmark summit, or we all hope it will turn out to have been a landmark summit, when alliance leaders changed the recommendation, the guideline, that member states of NATO should spend 2% of their GDP on defense to a pledge. Now, on the one hand, that hardly looks like anyone's planning for a fractured or obsolete alliance. How confident are you that the momentum will continue? And what can best be done with all that money if it does? Because there's a huge amount. If countries like Germany, just Germany, get to 2% of GDP. That is a phenomenal amount of money. So what are you going to do with it?
Robin, we're going to continue to do what we're supposed to do, which is to generate peace on the European continent. And our goal is to wake up every morning and produce another 24 hours of peace. And if we can do that in perpetuity, we'll all be in a position to where we can celebrate 70 years from now the fact that we're about to celebrate 70 years of freedom on behalf of an alliance called NATO. And we're very, very proud of that. The 2% GDP pledge also takes into account that 20% of that 2% is focused on infrastructure. And I say that because it's a pretty complicated equation, and I know that many of you have had opportunities to discuss with our NATO Secretary General about the 2% characterization of what we do to assist with respect to capabilities, contributions, and cash. One of the things that the Secretary General is keen to point out is over the course of the last several years, we've had some ups and downs with respect to contributions from nations as it relates to the percentage of their GDP for cash contributions. But since 2014 to the present, I believe that our increase in overall euro value that goes to the militaries is in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 billion euros. And by 2020, I know that many of you have heard the Secretary General say from when this process started at Wales, by 2020, we'll have an increase in spending of euros that exceeds $100 billion.
And where does that compare with the Russian defense budget?
Yeah, much higher.
Right.
Yes.
So just the increase in spending.
That's correct.
Will be greater than Russia's current defense budget.
That's true. And if I could, Robin, but the thing to remember is when you talk about burden sharing, there's cash, there's contributions, and there's capabilities. And the reason I mention that is it forces us in uniform to make sure that every single euro that we get as much out of it as we possibly can, geared straight towards deterrence. And that's our goal.
You've just come yesterday from the D-Day commemorations in Normandy. You were only appointed last month, as I said. It must bring home to you when you're at such an occasion as Supreme Allied Commander, the enormity of what is at stake and the responsibility that your office has given to you. We'll come to specifics in a moment, but in general terms, could you outline the nature of the security challenges that you face as Supreme Allied Commander right now, the challenges, the disruptors in the coming years? Or to flip the same question around, what does winning for this alliance look like in your eyes?
I touched on it just a second ago, Robin. Winning is peace in perpetuity. And we've had the opportunity through generous burden sharing over the course of the last several years to improve our posture on the European continent. And one of the notables that was not the case 5 years ago was the fact that when nations rotate organizations to the European continent today, and they embrace exercise activities, those units that show up actually increase their readiness during the time that they participate in a training event or an exercise event. And that directly correlates to our ability to deter and generate peace in perpetuity. And that's exactly what we want to do. And I can't resist commenting on your first part of the question, which has to do with the experience at Normandy yesterday. One of the things that's notable was this operation was designed to liberate France. It was to liberate France. And that obviously is focused on generating peace. And when you take a look at the actual events that occurred inside the overall campaign, one that was most effective is what took place on Utah Beach. And on Utah Beach, what I would tell you is the hallmark of success had to do with the fact that in air, land, and sea, in the Utah Beach execution, the degree of alignment and transparency between the three domains and the degree of coordination was higher than probably all the other operations. And as you could well imagine, that resulted in greater neutralization of targets and greater security for the forces that actually invaded the beach. And that concept is exactly what we have to do today. And my job as the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe is to take the forces that we have and day in and day out improve their alignment and transparency so that if called upon to deter, they'll be in a position to where they can get the most juice for the squeeze because of the readiness disposition of the forces that we have. and the fact that they understand the full scale of what they're embracing.
It's very important, and thank you for providing that setting. And within that setting, of course, we have to go to specifics, and there are a number of ways to do that, and it's almost limitless, the kind of questions I could ask. But I was just minded because this week I saw that Chinese President Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin had met in Moscow, and I'm going to read to you and the audience a couple of the remarks made by the two leaders, as reported by the BBC. The BBC reported Mr. Xi as saying the following: "In the past 6 years, we have met nearly 30 times. Russia is the country that I have visited the most times, and President Putin is my best friend and colleague." President Putin responded, the BBC went on, by saying he was pleased, and I quote, "pleased to say that Russian-Chinese relations have reached an unprecedented level. It is a global partnership and strategic cooperation." If that were true, it would not be good. It wouldn't be good news, would it? And there's a lot of talk about strategic cooperation between China and Russia, and some people say it's bluster, some people say it's real, some people say some of it's bluster and some of it's real. But if there is some kind of global strategic alliance and cooperation, then Europe, being part of the world and being part of the international security architecture, provides a good test case. Do you see any real evidence of Sino-Russian cooperation in Europe?
Robin, the first thing I would say is you brought the point up yourself. If that were true, I can certainly contend that there's a degree of cooperation between the two nations, as evidenced by the recent exchange. And when people start to approach me on issues like this, I just want to share with this group that my first concern when folks mention Russia and China is the word vigilance. And I immediately focus on the forces that I command and the forces that share the responsibility to ensure that we can effectively deter on the European continent and abide by the charter of NATO. So it reminds me how important it is to maintain vigilance and to ensure that the readiness of your forces is as high as it can possibly be. Every training event is designed to perfection. Every exercise event is aligned to maximize your capabilities in air, land, sea, space, and cyber, and bring a whole-of-nation, whole-of-government approach into all those capabilities. On the vigilance side of the house, as everybody here knows, I obviously pay close attention to that nation that exists to the east called Russia, and I obviously pay close attention to the activities on the European continent with respect to China. And we have certainly seen over the course of the last several years, China increasing their economic involvement and other involvement on the European continent. Ports in Sweden, ports in Iceland, a lot of interest in what's taking place with respect to airfields in Greenland. All of those activities force us to pay very, very close attention to what China is doing on the European continent. And obviously, we pay very, very close attention to what Russia is doing on our continent. The activities that exist between those two nations, we pay close attention to. We keep our vigilance up. Time will tell of the sincerity of that relationship, but my promise to you is we pay very, very close attention to all those activities.
Right. You might not be able to answer this question, but how do you pay close attention?
That's
listening into them?
That's a great question. In the Supreme Allied Command of Europe's responsibility bag, it is my job to have a campaign that allows us to effectively deter to a greater degree tomorrow than we do today. And what we focus on at SACEUR is to make sure that with each day we improve our overall indications and warnings, we improve our overall command and control and feedback, and we improve our mission command. And for 360 degrees around the European continent, what we have to do each and every day is ensure that we can see the battle space better tomorrow than we did today. That's indications and warnings. And ensure that we can find a way to get the data that we retrieve back to the appropriate forces so that commanders in the field, the ones that I mentioned that serve as subordinates to me, are in a position to where they can take the data and effectively lift and shift forces so that they can better deter. And that means they have to have good feedback from the fielded forces. And the final portion of that campaign to improve our ability to make sure that we can appropriately deter and keep our vigilance up is called mission command. And that's where the forces at the forward sector know exactly what it is that their responsibilities are and that they can execute to a successful level. And day in and day out, that is what we work on enormously inside of SACEUR.
And just coming back for a second, this question of strategic cooperation, because I think it is actually a good test case. You know, if we take a conflict like Ukraine, I mean, this is a major flashpoint. It's also a terrible human tragedy with thousands upon thousands of people who have been killed. And I'll come to Russia and Ukraine specifically, but unless I've missed something, the Chinese are not involved with the Russian action in Ukraine, are they?
I don't think so.
Right. So in other words, if we're starting from that cooperation is real down to bluster, we're moving a little bit down to bluster just with one example there. Let me stay with Ukraine. What more, if anything, can we do to stop and or push back Russian aggression in that country?
First of all, in Ukraine, it is by, with, and through the nation for assistance. And as this body of experts is probably aware, we've taken the time from a national perspective. Many nations that are involved in NATO, who are allies of NATO, have attempted to assist with Ukraine to allow them to properly secure the sovereignty of their air, land, sea, space, and cyber domains. And Ukraine is working very, very hard on this issue, and many of the nations have contributed in assets and in capabilities for defensive purposes that will allow Ukraine to better defend their sovereignty. And up to this point, what we've seen is cases where we've had some improvement, we've had some setbacks, we've had some more improvement, we've had some setbacks. But the key to this, Robin, is number one, this is a Ukrainian-Russian issue. And anything that needs to be done as far as national contributions, or certainly as far as NATO equities are concerned, it has to be through the nation of Ukraine. So it is by, with, and through. And as many people in this audience know, we've had activities that have taken place to assist the Ukrainians to adequately defend themselves.
And are you? Is there anything new about your mandate with regards to Ukraine? I mean, you've only been in for a month, so that's the answer is hardly. I'm not suggesting it's likely to be yes, but you know, are we in the process of advancing our support, of giving more in the way of equipment, of intelligence to the Ukrainians?
I'll speak from my United States European commander hat. With that hat on, that there are engagements that are taking place with respect to military training teams to find ways to assist the Ukrainian armed forces to improve their disposition to adequately to secure their terrain. And I contend that those engagements are ongoing, and my contention is those engagements will probably increase over time through the next several years.
Do you think, just staying, I mean, Ukraine, Slovakia is bordered by 5 countries, and Austria's right here, seems quite safe and secure. Ukraine is one of those countries out there in the east. Do you think that the Ukrainians are ever going to get back even eastern Ukraine? Or is this, let me put to you, this is how I often describe that conflict, and I know that part of the world pretty well for a Brit. And my perception is that Vladimir Putin does not want to, and probably can't, and knows he can't, go much further. But a little bit like a gas oven, okay, or let's say not a gas oven, well, a gas stove. He's leaving that right where it is, and he's perfectly happy to do so. And when he wants to turn the gas up, he'll turn it up. And when he wants to turn it down, he'll turn it down. But there's no way you're taking his hands off that lever. Do you see that too?
What I do see is a nation wanting to defend their sovereignty. And from a U.S. perspective, we're very interested in supporting that, and many of the nations that exist in NATO are very interested in supporting that. And those activities that you're alluding to, that time will only tell. But if we can engage with Ukraine and work by, with, and through that nation to allow them to improve their disposition with respect to security, they will be better able to deter, and that's what we're focused on.
Staying with Russia, but perhaps, if you like, to bring in China again or other actors, let's talk about the cyber threat. What are you guys working on?
In NATO and in many nations, we've all admitted that we're in the very early stages of embracing the domain called cyberspace. And one of the mistakes that many of our nations have made in the past is is probably getting a little bit out in front of our headlights with respect to generating forces that serve in the cyberspace domain. And one of the realities that I think many of the nations have adjusted to over the course of the last 2 years is the fact that in order to have the capability to operate in the cyberspace domain, you have to ensure that your hygiene and your defense of your own network is in good order. And many of the nations have organized uniformed military members to engage in cyber activity, and they've been smart enough to see that there's a national perspective and there's a government perspective with respect to your effectiveness in cyber. And those nations are working very, very hard from a whole of government, whole of nation, whole of military perspective to improve their hygiene in the cyberspace domain. And that discussion is a long way of saying you have to make sure that your defensive mechanisms and your detection mechanisms are up to speed for the 21st century confrontation in the cyberspace domain. So organizations have designated commanders. Their missions are focused on improving the defensive posture of their cyberspace activities, and they're doing a great job of aligning them better so than they have in the past from a military perspective to a government perspective to a whole of nation approach perspective. And after nations have gotten to a point to where they feel pretty comfortable with their ability to secure their networks from a defensive standpoint, then they start looking at the activities that they may want to embrace from an offensive standpoint. But I think up to this point, what we've seen is an improvement of our ability in many, many of the nations that represent NATO, and certainly in the United States, to better field our forces, organize our forces, improve our defensive posture, and now be in a position to where work the alignment and transparency across a whole of nation, whole of government approach to be more effective if required to act from an offensive cyber perspective.
Yeah, are we winning? I mean, like in fact, not far away from here is a country called Estonia, which is it was provided a wake-up call in 2007 when there was a massive cyber attack on the country. I don't think we were winning then. That's 12 years ago. Are we winning now?
I can tell you, Robin, that the campaign momentum to improve our defensive cyber posture is on the right trajectory. And that's very, very important. And the definition of winning is still to be determined because I think we're all working very, very hard to get better alignment and better transparency just from a national perspective between militaries, nations, and governments. And my sense is if we continue the campaign trajectory that we're currently on from a defensive standpoint, we'll be in a position to where soon, and soon could be in terms of years, to where somebody sitting at this seat might be able to comfortably look you in the eye and tell you that we are definitely winning in the cyberspace domain.
Mm-hmm. I have a question on Slido, and it is from none other than Nick Gowing. And the question is as follows. After the Crimea NATO failure to even see the Russian intentions, how speedily can Supreme Allied Command Europe now order military action anywhere without consulting NAC?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'd just like to tell you that my job as the new NATO military commander has been to improve our posture, and we've done a really good job over the course of the last 3 years under the leadership of General Mike Scaparrotti of dramatically shifting and improving our posture. And I have the opportunity now, as a result of the resources that exist on the European continent, to focus on 2 areas. And those areas are, number 1, our speed, and number 2, our stance. And speed has to do with our ability, if required, to deter as fast as we possibly can. In all domains, in all geographical quadrants, and from a whole of nation, whole of government approach. And speed refers to how fast can you make a decision, how quick can you get your forces to move, and if required and you have to replenish your forces, how fast can you get those replenishment supplies in. So decision making is absolutely positively critical. And the first key in decision making is to make sure that I understand exactly what my authorities are, and I understand what the NAC authorities are. And I certainly never look at being required to consult with the NAC as a bad thing. I think that's a very, very good thing. Our militaries are civilian commanded, civilian controlled, and our militaries bear the responsibility to answer to their governments. And we need a whole of nation, whole of government, whole of military approach. And it's my job, if we ever get in a position to where we're dissatisfied about consultations with the NAC with respect to speed and decision making, is to go to the NAC and let them know what the situation is, and I would bear the responsibility to adequately describe to the NAC what it is we're attempting to do. And we all know that that's a process that requires constant massaging, and we're going to get better over time, and that requires engagement, and we're certainly willing to do that.
Thanks. I'm going to come to the audience in a couple of minutes. We've got about, 12, 11 minutes left, 10 minutes left. I just want to change direction. Turkey. This is a very important, very sensitive matter, a major issue with a fast approaching deadline attached to it. Could be a matter of a couple of weeks ago. It's all about Turkey's planned purchase of a Russian missile system and also US-made F-35 jets. There's concern this could lead to ultimately Turkey falling out of NATO or falling into a kind of second-class membership status. First of all, because it is a complicated one, not everybody follows the ins and outs. Can you just explain what the problem is here?
The challenge is Turkey looks as if they'll acquire an S-400 system from the Russians. And that S-400 system is not NATO interoperable. So in order...
Explain what, sorry to interrupt, because this is another one. What does being interoperable actually mean?
Great point, Robin. NATO interoperable means does the system actually communicate to the resources that exist in NATO from a ones and zeros perspective electronically, from a voice perspective? Do the individuals that have to maintain the system, do they speak NATO language? Do the individuals that actually operate the system, does it speak NATO language? To the individuals that have to sustain the system, does it speak NATO language? And the fact is, the S-400 does not. The second challenge is we have the United States that's in an agreement for Turkey to acquire an F-35 aircraft. And that F-35 aircraft is NATO interoperable. It speaks the electronic language, it speaks the voice language. You can acquire it, you can operate it, you can sustain it over the long haul, and the individuals that represent NATO have the compatibility to be able to use the system. You cannot operate an F-35 in the vicinity of an S-400. They won't talk to each other, and what the two systems will attempt to do, certainly the S-400 against the F-35, is attempt to exploit the F-35's capabilities. And I will tell you that we're not interested in sharing the F-35 capabilities from a radar perspective, from an operational perspective, from a sustainment perspective with the Russians. And we've made that very, very clear. So that's the rub with those systems.
Right, and we're not interested is a very nice diplomatic way of saying what people like Kay Bellich Hutchinson and various others who are furious to the point of this may be the end of our relationship with Turkey. I would like to ask you what you hear about whether the Turks will frankly back down or not. In fact, I'm going to ask you that.
Robin, that's a decision that the government of Turkey is going to have to make. But here's what I do know. The mill-to-mill relationship that NATO has with Turkey is as strong and as thick as it's been in the last decade. And the degree of convergence between the militaries that represent Turkey and between the militaries that represent NATO is far greater than the degree of divergence. So there are many things that are very comfortable with that relationship. Turkey is an important NATO partner, as are all the other 28 nations. I suspect that we'll continue to have that relationship. It is our job to make sure that we nurture that relationship. And if day in and day out you can force yourself to jump up again to 70,000 feet and look down on the terrain and look at the relationship that exists between Turkey and all their NATO partners, that there is a lot more convergence than there is divergence.
I don't want to put words into your mouth, but it is such an enormous... I mean, when you say, and obviously nobody wants to designate some countries as more important than others in NATO, but let's just agree that Turkey, look at its position. I mean, it is strategically phenomenally important. Are you saying, as I say, I don't want to put words into your mouth, look, one way or another, we'll have to make the best of this?
Robin, I don't want you to put words in my mouth. But what I will say is Turkey is an important NATO ally. Slovakia is an important NATO ally. So I can tell you right now, when I get to 50,000 feet and I take a look at this great nation, and I get to 50,000 feet and I take a look at Turkey, I say to myself, these are two incredibly important NATO allies.
I do notice previously you were at 70,000 feet, and now you're down at 50,000.
My eyes are getting bad, and I'm getting older, so I got to get down and out.
Likewise. Okay. I want to throw out some questions to the audience now, please. So first question there, please.
Thank you, General. Frank Gardner, BBC security correspondent. NATO, of course, was conceived 70 years ago to defend Europe, and yet it has operated well outside its normal theatre of operations in Afghanistan. Do you envisage it being called upon to operate in the Gulf, what you and the States would call the Persian Gulf?
Frank, I do not envision direct involvement NATO in the Middle East. But what I do know is we bear the responsibility to protect the European continent. And the engagements that exist on behalf of NATO in Afghanistan are for the purpose of making sure that we can neutralize external ops planners against the nations that exist on the European continent. And we want to make sure that nobody is doing anything to inflict loss of life on the citizens that we bear the responsibility to secure. And it's my belief, in my consultation with the Secretary General, that he focuses on that. We have to protect the security disposition of the European continent. Hence, sometimes you have involvement in terrain that's a little bit farther away than is of the norm. And today, our involvement in Afghanistan is very, very important. And time will tell with respect to what takes place in the Middle East. But for right now, you don't see a large shift with respect to any NATO conversations that are focused on the Middle East.
There are a number of questions coming in on Slido, and in fact one of them's just come in, which is an interesting one about European strategic autonomy. This is another big one. In fact, Kay Bailey Hutchison was on one of the US networks the other day. This is the United States permanent representative to NATO, the ambassador to NATO, and very concerned about the European defense initiative, the idea of Europe having its own defense capacity and the competition with NATO, and especially referring back to a question asked to you a bit earlier about, increasing resources to 2% of GDP. We can overall increase resources, but if they're all spread into different areas, potentially chaotic. I mean, how much of a concern, it must be quite a pressing concern for you, this question of how the Europeans are going to manage.
It is, Robin. The great news is you actually have a resource to work with to improve your security disposition. So my job, and in my consultations with Ambassador Hutchison, we focus intently on alignment and transparency of every single euro, every single resource, every single digit on a network to ensure that our ability to improve our indications and warnings, our command and control, and our mission feedback over time gets better and better and better as a result of improved alignment to operate in all domains, in all factions. So whole of nation, whole of government, whole of military, and whatever other organizations on the European continent that are willing to assist from a resource perspective to improve our security disposition. We have to put our arms around those resources and figure out a way to get along and improve our transparency and alignment going forward.
Thank you. Any more questions? I did see that lady there, so please.
Yes, thank you very much, General. I actually have a different perspective question. And how do you plan to navigate disruption at the field? We all know that the soldiers, the war fighters on the field are the ones that need the capabilities the most. And to deal with cybersecurity threats, disruptive technology, you need, and you talked about the whole government approach, it also involves human interoperability and a change in the internal military culture. How? Because the political reality, strategic reality is very different than reality on the field. So what are your plans together with Allied Command and Transformation in tackling this culture?
That's a great question, and if I could kind of add on to your question, what really matters is the disposition of your soldiers in the field, your sailors that are on the sea, your airmen that are manning aircraft, and to ensure that we're in a position to where day in and day out, our overall indications and warnings in all domain in the area that we bear the responsibility to deter improves. And the command and control and feedback that you get from those areas in all domains is getting better. so that you can better characterize the environment that you're operating in, so that you can more quickly respond or more quickly act over time if you want to shape deterrence conditions in a particular environment. So making sure that all of our militaries that are contributing with the tremendous contributions that are occurring and the tremendous capabilities that we have, if they're focused on the campaign of indications and warnings, command and control, and mission command, we'll better be able to characterize the battle space, if you will, or the deterrent space, and better be able to bring the right forces in place at the right time to ensure that we continue to generate peace in perpetuity.
Don't forget to introduce yourselves. The gentleman here, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm the Belgian ambassador to NATO, as you know. Just one question, or let's say a comment rather. Your remarks so far have not referred to anything about the threats along the southern flank of NATO, which is in a way remarkable, but perhaps not because we're in Bratislava and not in Brussels. But that said, it may be difficult for countries which are further away from Russia to ensure a public and political buy-in if we seem to exclusively, or at least for most of us, focusing on Russia and sort of not mentioning terrorism and other issues. So how would you see this? Is it not important that we should focus also on the southern flank, perhaps differently, obviously, but at least make sure that we have a public buy-in, in those countries which are perhaps more remote from Russia? And secondly, quick comment on the Turkey issue. Yes, I do hear you, obviously, but the little counter-argument may be that Russia has installed S-400 in Syria, and that hasn't stopped Israel from flying F-35s nearby.
I'll start with the first part of your question, Ambassador. When I reference 360 degrees in geography, that certainly grabs the southern hub. And what takes place in the southern hub is just as important as what takes place in the Arctic and what takes place in the center portion of the Atlantic Ocean. And the key is, in all 360 degrees in all domains, improve your indications and warnings, improve your command and control and feedback, and improve your mission command. Because as you well know, Ambassador, the interdependencies that exist between activities in the Mediterranean are connected to the Arctic. They're connected to the center portion of the Atlantic Ocean. And the forces that we may use, for example, in the space domain and the cyber domain, if called upon by nations, can actually span both of those regions simultaneously. And I bear the responsibility, as do our great nations and our great joint forces commands, to never, ever, ever take my eye off the ball with respect to the full 360-degree quadrant. And as you know, there are many activities along the southern hub that we are embracing right now from a NATO perspective to improve our indications and warnings and improve our feedback. So we'll continue to press forward in the appropriate direction. And I believe that the campaign momentum that exists right now with respect to trajectory and improving our disposition in the south to better surveil is improving.
Just before I close this session out, I want to remind everybody that please remain seated when we do close out. The next discussion will be on looking ahead to NATO at 80 and the future. And General Walters will be sitting in the audience. And as I said, he may turn the tables. He would have the Belgian ambassador to NATO. You might want to ask some questions yourself. What I do want to do very much is thank you, General Walters. I understand this is your first, as it were, sit-down public discussion since you got your job. And for my part, and I'm sure the audiences, it was extremely illuminating. Keeping all of us informed is something that we appreciate and is a vital part of what everybody, whichever role they play in the security sphere, is trying to do. So thank you very much, and I hope you had a lovely time in Bratislava.
I did. Thank you, Robin. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I know. Please, go. No, go right ahead. Go right ahead, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator for the next session, Ali Aslan.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful to have you here this morning with us. NATO at 80 Alliance Navigating Disruptive Partnerships. And we're going to pick up right where Robin Shepherd and General Todd Walters left off. And of course, pick up on this topic many of the issues that will be discussed now concerning the current and future state of the Alliance. For that, it's my great pleasure. We have a wonderful, wonderful panel here with us. First up, she's the Minister of Defense of the Republic of North Macedonia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Minister Radmila Shekerinska. I'm delighted to welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland. Great to see him here. Minister Jacek Czaputowicz, ladies and gentlemen. Very happy to invite up on stage the Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at NATO, Ambassador Tajan Ildem. And last but certainly not least, he's the Vice Chief of Defense at the German Ministry of Defense, Vice Admiral Joachim Rühle, ladies and gentlemen, is here. Minister Shekerinska, indeed, NATO at 80. Just a couple of months ago, world leaders have gathered in Washington to mark the 70th anniversary of this alliance. Quite a remarkable achievement indeed. Before we look at the current state, and of course, perhaps more importantly, discuss the future state of the alliance. If you look back, obviously you're not a NATO member yet, soon to come. You haven't been a NATO member for the past 70 years. But if you look at the previous 7 decades of NATO, what's the word that comes to your mind? What describes the first 7 decades the best, according to your opinion?
Well, I'll be very, very biased and just mention a word that I believe connects North Macedonia to NATO. And I would say quick. Maybe there are other regions where NATO was less quick, but when it comes to Macedonia, or now North Macedonia, the reaction of the alliance twice was very quick, very timely, and with the right political instincts.
So quickness.
Even at 70, right?
Even at 70, the agility of NATO at 70, quickness is still very much what Minister Shekerinska said. Minister Czaputowicz, what words describe NATO to you the first 70 years?
It is, I think, the most successful alliance in history, 70 years of unity, and with successes deterring Soviet Union, then enlarging. We, at the same time, celebrated 20th anniversary of joining NATO of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary, and we treated as investment in our security, also together with our membership in the European Union, we return back to the community of Western states. So I think that it is a positive assessment, but we have to also remember that to remain relevant, NATO have to modernize, have to prepare to address new challenges, which are traditional one, aggressive policy of Russia, but also the new one like cyber security. So we have to be prepared, and we have to cooperate together in order to prepare the alliance to new times.
All right, a few more words than one, but I think success is the one that we're looking for. Success. If you describe the first 70 years achievement, success.
Indeed, it is. I would say that success, it is a feature.
There you go. Ambassador Ildem, what describes NATO to you if you look back?
Well, indeed, NATO has been the longest alliance, the longest lived alliance, but also the most successful one. And the success depended on its adaptability. We are continuously adapting ourselves to the changing security environment. And if we were able to maintain peace, stability, and protect our almost 1 billion citizens, it is thanks to our adaptability to stand up for the new challenges.
Adaptability, here the key word. Of course, that's also the term that Rose Gottmuller gave me to describe NATO best at the Munich Security Conference back in February. And I want to remind that this session is being conducted in cooperation with the Munich Security Conference. So we have quite a variety here already. We have quickness, agility, achievement, success, and adaptability. Vice Admiral.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. And I think adaptability and coherence are the words for me. So I'm now almost 60 years old and served for 41 years in my armed forces. And NATO is the red line all about it. And I started in the Cold War, 12 years on my fast patrol boat, securing the coastline of Denmark and Germany and Norway. Then we had this in-between period where we had the question, is NATO still relevant? We always said yes, but there had been some rumors around and some questions if it has been. And now, I think we heard in the first session this morning, now only 5 years ago, we saw there is another tremendous change coming, and we reacted tremendously fast.
Fast, coherent. So I think we have a nice variety of words, and words that you can also chime in via Slido. Of course, you know the drill. Keep the questions coming. I'll include them as we go along, Minister Shekerinska. Now let's take off the gloves. We talked nicely about agility, adaptability, coherence, and success. But of course, the current state of NATO is a difficult one. We heard from General Todd Walters leading into this discussion about the many challenges that the alliance is facing. What, according to you, is the biggest threat, the biggest challenge that the alliance is facing today?
As an outsider, probably we do tend to appreciate the success more than we worry about the weaknesses. And I have to say, again, judging from our own experience, we have had, as a country, and me personally, I have had 2 encounters with how NATO operates, both in times of crisis and in times of opportunity. In 2001, as a result of the aftermath of several Yugoslav wars, but also as a result of internal weaknesses and conflicts, we have seen NATO taking responsibility and taking action. And it was done in the right timing, with the right motives, as I said, with the right political instincts, and with the right partner. And that was the EU. And the combination of measures, moves, and policies worked. And it saved my country from going through the hardships and the bloodshed of Bosnia, Croatia, and some of the other conflicts in former Yugoslavia. And when this changed in a way and our country normalized, we expected membership relatively quickly. It did not materialize because of regional realities and because of our dispute with Greece. But when we were ready, NATO proved to be ready as well. In 2017, when we took over as a new government and we expressed our interest to join NATO and solve our problems with both of our neighbors, Bulgaria and Greece, there was not too much optimism. As you said, this was an alliance with open issues and with some doubts. And I remember the first message we received from many officials and member states was, please manage expectations. Don't go too far. Don't go too quick. We did our share of taking the risks and the responsibilities, but NATO did follow. And this was not in the best period for NATO. So I do give NATO more credit than some of the members do, because we actually appreciate much more not only the stability, the prosperity, but also the value-based system that it inspires.
So I'm
because
hearing
when you lose something, you appreciate it a bit more. We had a disruption, but it was a positive disruption. We went back to the Euro-Atlantic track.
And the appreciation that becomes abundantly very clear through your statements here. Of course, your country, North Macedonia, set to become soon the 30th member of this alliance. And Secretary General Stoltenberg was just in Skopje to reiterate that point once more. But let's talk about the current challenges again, Minister Čaputović. If you look at the alliance today at 70 NATO, according to you, in the Polish view, what is the biggest challenge?
I think that simply NATO have to modernize, have to invest in the development of defense capabilities, maybe to also because there is an expectation on the side of the United States that European states would increase their defense spending. We share that opinion and we do it. We have to simply strengthen NATO, modernize in order to meet challenges. There is also behind the kind of maybe threat that transatlantic links might be weakened. From our perspective, transatlantic unity is crucial because to face challenges we have here in Poland and Central Eastern Europe, we need American presence military presence in Poland and also in Central Europe, in Europe, to deter Russia, which is stepping up its capability in Kaliningrad region and of course conducts aggressive policy vis-à-vis Ukraine, for example. So maintain unity, it will be a challenge, but we are rather optimistic because countries understand that only united we will be successful facing these kind of serious threats. Of course, at the same time, we should, as Europeans within the European Union, develop our own capabilities and possibilities to act on our own. We are not against that, but it must be a complementary process to what's going on in NATO rather than to replacing NATO. It is not possible to create by European states the capabilities which is necessary in order to deter the aggressor.
Unity, of course, a key word, and you have stressed the importance of unity in order to deter Russia from aggressive actions in the region, something that the Secretary General Stoltenberg, Ambassador Ildem, of course, reiterated when he called out for a new military strategy to prevent, or rather to combat, growing Russian nuclear threat. How does this new military strategy look, very much in particular? What are the details?
Well, first of all, it is true that we are confronting ourselves with different threats and challenges from different directions. 360-degree approach is something that we keep close to our heart. We talk about what has happened in 2014, a watershed year, with the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia, aggressive actions in eastern Ukraine. And I must say that since 2014, with the Wales summit meeting and the subsequent summit meetings, the alliance is strengthening its capacities, capabilities. So unity is one word, but another one is strength. And I think military strategy that you are referring to is also looking at the future with all possible threats and challenges that we could be facing and how NATO would be fit for purpose. Now, of course, talking about 360-degree approach, we have to take into account the threats, challenges emanating from the south. It is more complex in nature, and some of the threats and challenges, NATO cannot respond on its own. We have to think within a comprehensive approach, also keeping in mind the necessity to cooperate with other international organizations, and European Union is one of them. And the important thing would also be to continue adapting ourselves, because we don't have a crystal ball to predict what will be the future and what it would bring. In the past, we didn't perhaps predict everything, like 9/11 or the rise of ISIS. But definitely, one thing is clear: we have to keep adapting ourselves with strategic anticipation as to what could possibly have. And we know that the future will be with great power competition, rise of state actors.
So adaptability, of course, once again, the key word to enhance military strategies and capacities and capabilities. Obviously, all important. That's why, Vice Admiral, I want to come to you, because we talked about how to stick together, how to act in accordance and in unity. Burden sharing, of course, is one of the topics that keep coming up when we talk about NATO. General Todd Walters referred to it. Now, when Donald Trump criticizes the allies, the NATO members, for not living up to their end of the bargain, your country, Germany, is very much at the receiving end of this criticism oftentimes. If we look at what Germany has done, raised spending, defense spending by 5 billion this year alone to 47 billion. That's quite impressive by German standards. But at the end of the day, it is still only 1.35% of GDP, of course, and therefore falls short of the 2% that not only Donald Trump, but NATO, in that sense, is insisting. Does Germany need to do more here? Does Germany need to step up its game?
Thank you very much for the question here, yourself. No, but I think you answered part of the question. I think we stick to the 2%. That was quite clear. That had been made statements by the Parliament, by my German Parliament. But I think we do it in a stepped approach. That's decided by the politicians, and we have a capability plan which sticks to this 1.5% in 2024. And as a German, I have to tell you, I think that's an increase in defense spending for my country by 30% from starting 2014. And when we come to 1.5% in 2024, it's almost 80% or more. So that's a significant number we invest. And please don't forget, and General Walters did it, I think it's not only defense spending, it's commitment as well. I think, don't forget when we talk about the challenges in Europe, about Russia or the South, I think just now I have about 1,300 soldiers in Afghanistan. We are the second largest troop contributor to Afghanistan. I think we stepped up in the framework nation concept, and I have a fully fledged battalion in Lithuania. I have stepped up for another major command, which is the Joint Support and Enabling Command in Ulm, where we are distributing all the troops which come in, and we have to distribute them 360 degrees around. So this 1.5% in 2024 is not the end. We aim at 2%, but we are investing and dedicating a lot of money to defense. So for me, I think it's in accordance with my capability plan decided by my chief of.
So you're confident that Germany will meet the goal of spending 2% of its GDP?
That's what my politicians have always made clear, and my defense minister is reiterating in every defense minister meeting.
One country that is already meeting that 2% goal is, of course, Poland. As a matter of fact, looking to expand in the future. Much has been in the news. Poland has been in the news in regards to desiring, for lack of a better term, a U.S. base on its own soil in Poland. The Americans seem rather hesitant to fulfill that wish. Are you disappointed? Are you disappointed about the American response?
No, we are not disappointed. First of all, everything is in the process of negotiation, and we hope to achieve some agreement with the Americans. Indeed, we think that only the American soldiers can create a real deterrent for Russia. Therefore, we want American troops stationed on our territory. Next week, it will be the visit of President Andrzej Duda in Washington, meeting with Donald Trump. We expect some decisions to be announced concerning the increase of American presence in Poland. We can look at it from the quantitative perspective, more soldiers, but also qualitative. I mean, more equipment, better prepared, more training. It is a necessary step in order to simply face these new challenges. I think that everything is on a good way. As I already said, we are a member of the European Union, but we are on the eastern flank of NATO. We think that only NATO and the United States, our alliance with the United States, create a real problem or deterrent for Russia. Until Russia continues this policy, we expect that NATO will concentrate on that region. Therefore, for us, modernization, training, preparedness of forces is crucial. I mean for us, also for Baltic states, and the decisions taken in Warsaw 2016 are very positive to deploy forces. Germany is framework nation in Lithuania. Pole's troops are under the Canadian command in Latvia. There are troops in Estonia. In Poland, the United States is already a framework nation, and we have this bilateral agreement. So the process is going on. We discussed that issue also with our allies, and I think that there is a growing acceptance for that move.
And if I may just add up on that, because we have many questions and remarks already coming in on Slido, one in particular, which just leads nicely into what you and I have just been talking about, Minister Čaputovič. To the Polish Foreign Minister, is the NATO-Russia Founding Act still applicable or relevant, is the question to you?
I think it was a good act and conducted by both sides in 90s, as I remember. But, you know, there is an argument that maybe this deployment of American troops can be treated by Russia as a negative move, and some commentators say that it is against the treaty with Russia. But when you look at that document, Russia already broke the treaty. So can you break something which has already been broken? So this is the problem. So there are many agreements Russia simply breaks, and we have to exert pressure on Russia and demand that they obey international law concerning its activity, foreign policy vis-à-vis Ukraine, for example, but Georgia earlier, and other parts of the world. So I think that only decisive signals to Russia is a proper policy vis-à-vis such an aggressive state using military power against its neighbors. So this is the problem. The problem is that, and I am very pleased that it is understood and that the reaction is positive, as we wish. Only preparedness to new threat is the way we should react to this kind of activities.
Ambassador Ildem, Donald Trump has made it clear in the past that you know, here and there he has questioned perhaps even the relevance of this alliance of NATO. How concerned are you about the continued U.S. commitment to this alliance going forward?
Well, I think we have heard U.S. statements at different levels, but at the highest level as well, reiterating their strong commitment to NATO and collective security as such. And also we have to recall the bipartisan strong stand of Congress. And I remember the 70th anniversary address of the Secretary General to the joint session, which was interrupted, the speech was interrupted so many times with standing ovation. shift of axis or any change of orientation on the part of Turkey. We have heard from different officials at the highest level that there is no question about it. It is true that the S-400 issue is something which is a matter of discussion.
And a matter of irritation, let's be honest here.
But at the same time, we need to see that, as Secretary General has put it several times, it is the national sovereign decision of each ally which system to acquire. The most important thing from NATO's point of view is to have countries have the systems which are interoperable with each other to operate together. This is something which is of priority as an alliance.
All right, quite a diplomatic answer. Didn't want to put you in a complicated situation here, being a former Turkish ambassador to NATO, but of course representing NATO these days. Minister Shekerinska, we talked about PESCO, we talked about strategic autonomy from not just from the United States, but in essence having a precursor perhaps even to an EU army. Is that the way to go? Is that something that you would support as soon to the latest NATO member?
Well, let me apropos this mention something with regards to the if not US contribution to NATO, at least US contribution to the Balkans and to the NATO enlargement. I mean, just as the discussions were picking up about whether NATO is obsolete and whether there is a US strategic interest into the alliance, we not only got the invitation to join NATO, but we also got a very strong US support. And the recent information indicate that we should expect the ratification of our NATO treaty in the US Senate early this autumn, which is much quicker than our predecessor, which was Montenegro, which shows, apropos the deeds and the tweets, that the deeds actually do matter. As we speak now, we have more than 1,500 US soldiers that are conducting together with our soldiers and with soldiers from 5 other member states of NATO, the biggest military exercise that North Macedonia has ever had on its territory. So the commitment is there, and for us, it was very, very visible. Our strategic goals are very clear. Join NATO, join the European Union. And as newcomers, we do not offer advices so easily. But what we have seen in our history is that the real results emerge when these two organizations, which are essentially based on the same values and more or less the same strategic goals, cooperate well. And in the history of our country, to a certain extent in the history of our region, whenever this partnership worked, everyone felt more secure and better. So with regards to your question, what? I think both. We need a strong, clear NATO with the same mission, empowered by the new challenges. We also need a European Union that will take the responsibility also over its continent, not only with regards to defense. And this is why I look forward to the soon-to-be decisions by the European Council on the possibility to start accession talks with North Macedonia. Because what we have given to our region, to ourselves first, but also to the European Union, is one of the few successes. And it was successful because we were committed, because we have showed the courage, because the Greek government showed the courage, but also because NATO and EU were supporting us. So this is a joint success, and I think it should be appreciated, and we should all give us a credit for making this achievement, which 2 years ago was considered impossible.
Admiral, I also want to give you a chance to respond to the aspect of strategic autonomy, of the EU beefing up its capacities. What's your take?
Yes, I think accompanying my defense minister now for almost 2 years, I know exactly what she wants to do, I think. And she made it crystal clear all the last 2 years that collective and homeland defense is part of NATO, crystal clear. But I think when she came into his office about 5 years ago, there was the Ebola crisis, and she wanted to respond as the European Union, and we had no capabilities for it, no C2. And imagine, we are now down in Africa, in Mali. My troops are there, about 1,000 troops under the command of the United Nations and the EU. So we really have to focus and make our common endeavor as the European Union stronger. But as twins to NATO, I think we do not want to duplicate any capabilities. But if you look at all the nations, and I think you look at infantry fighting vehicles, we have an awful lot of different fighting vehicles all around Europe. No interoperability when it comes to driving these vehicles or maintenance of these vehicles. So the idea is to probably come together, define together what we need, and when we are stronger here in the European pillar, then we are strong in NATO. So I have no forces only dedicated to the European Union. No, they are all within NATO, and that's the cover.
Minister Čaputovič, a question comes to you once again via Slido, saying Poland is saying it wants to increase reliance on US troops. Is this not another obstacle to a unified EU defense strategy, is the question?
I don't think so. I agree with the General that we should strengthen capabilities of European countries as a European Union in defense, because it is necessary also in order to conduct operations on our own as a European Union, but there are some, it cannot be a duplication or competition with NATO forces. Some kind of threats, which is a threat from Russia, require unity of the alliance. Without the United States, European Union would not create such strong capabilities which would deter Russia. So I do not see here a contradiction. Sometimes there is understanding of European strategic autonomy as being simply independent from the United States. We do not accept that point of view. It could be within the broader alliance, and indeed investment in capabilities by the European Union member states to match the investment of the United States would be welcomed, and the only way.
So at the end of the day, Jim Rolfe, for some this discussion is perhaps a bit too positive about NATO and its current state. That's why he wants to shake it up by saying these are all very positive comments that this panel is saying about NATO. But what's critical? I mean, how would critics describe NATO at this particular point of time? Well, what criticism would be fair directed towards the State of the Alliance, Ambassador Ildem?
Well, first of all, I think NATO still keeps its relevance as strong as ever. For 70 years, we have maintained peace, and Secretary General in his speech on the 70th anniversary reminded us of how we were able to maintain this peace without a single shot fired after the Cold War. What we need to do, and it is going back to three keywords: unity, strength, and adaptability. On unity, we should be able to still maintain this unity in the decade to come, and for this we have to understand that unity does not mean uniformity. We are an alliance of democracies. There are elected governments, change of power, and different national priorities. But at the end of the day, no matter how we could be with divergent opinions and priorities, agree on the basics to defend each other. I mean, just to take 2018 summit meeting, Brussels summit meeting, it produced over 100 decisions. They are important ones, and it was with the consensus of all allies. So unity is important. Strength is yet another thing that we should focus on, creating capabilities, and we are doing a lot on that with our Wales Pledge, and General Walters referred to it, 2% GDP, but within 2%, 20% for new capabilities. And if I may add a word on EU capability development initiatives, I think there is nothing wrong with it. NATO sees it with a positive light, provided that we don't talk about two sets of requirements and two sets of capabilities. With the scarce resources that we are having, it should be one single. And the second important thing would be the availability of these capabilities, if need be, for NATO. And third, the involvement to the fullest possible extent of non-EU allies in these initiatives. And for adaptability, one last point that I have to emphasize, it is innovation. And NATO is focusing more and more on innovation with the work of the Allied Command transformation, but also with different initiatives, working with industry, trying to see the potential challenges that we face currently and in the future, using artificial intelligence, tapping into the potential of big data. Right. And right now we are working on it in a very focused manner.
Innovation, of course, innovation, key word, very much in line with Minister Čaputovic's wish, desire, and appeal for modernization of the alliance. We have quite a few questions on Slido, but we'll go to the audience. We'll take some live questions here, get your voices in, get this conversation moving in the next, in the last couple of minutes here. I think we have 20 minutes left. We can get a microphone here in the first row to the lady. She had her hand up, and we'll come to you next, gentleman. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Anna Wieslander with the Atlantic Council, Northern Europe office in Stockholm. So I have two questions concerning great power competition and how that is increasing, as Ambassador Ildem pointed out. One area is the Arctic, and NATO had the big Trident Juncture exercise this fall up north. How do you perceive NATO involvement in the Arctic if you look 10 years ahead? Will we be more present there? And the other question regards China, which is now increasingly moving into Europe. How does NATO perceive China ahead, and how are you dealing with this new situation?
China, something, of course, that General Todd Wohlers touched upon during his Q&A. Please go ahead.
Well, first of all, since we talk about 360-degree approach, it should cover all the regions, and Arctic is one region that we also pay attention to, and you rightly refer to the Trident Juncture exercise, which also helped us to raise our awareness in the challenges, the current and potential future challenges in that region. As to great power competition, and you refer to China. China is one of the permanent members of the UN Security Council. It is the second country in the world with the largest defense spending. It is an economic power and present in many regions, also in the neighborhood of NATO. Therefore, we need to have a better understanding regarding the potential challenges that China may pose, but at the same time focus on the possible cooperation and engagement with China. So we need to have such an engagement in different ways. I know that you all know that the Deputy Secretary General paid a visit to Beijing to attend a conference there and engage with Chinese officials. We also have military contacts, and I think we should elevate our understanding first, and second, to properly engage with China.
All right. I think the gentleman, you were up next. Microphone is coming to you. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, Samet Shabani from North Macedonia here, Horizon Civitas. I have a question for our dear for our dear Minister of Defense.
Not Prime yet, but who knows?
Well,
who knows? Who knows?
Okay. Well, as now North Macedonia is collecting ratifications from from NATO member states for its membership, there was a great aspire by Turkey to extradite 15 Gulenis as a compromise to give you ratification. But your government was a little bit clear in messages that they will respect the rule of law and they would not let any illegal acts such happened in Kosovo recently, previous to that. However, after this...
Can we get to the question?
Yes, after these messages, Turkey was also clear to say, okay, we are not on that point, it's not a big deal for us, and so on. What was the clear compromise that make such big aspirations of Turkey to extradite Gulenis all over the world, to reject from this aspiration and say, okay?
Defense Minister, very specific question, but go right ahead.
Yeah, and very difficult one, especially a month ago when we had some meetings. Let me be very clear. Turkey has never conditioned its ratification of the NATO treaty with these extraditions. And that was very positive. And what we said since the beginning is that we do not expect that one of the countries that has given us the strongest support to become a NATO member all these years will suddenly turn into an obstacle, because this is not in the interest of the region, this is not in the strategic interest of Turkey. What we have said is that we will continue our great relations with Turkey, like with other countries in the region. But of course, not only NATO membership, but our constitution is based on some key values: rule of law, respecting human rights. Everything that goes within that realm is fully acceptable, and we are usually very quick in making sure that these provisions are implemented. But let me say, we all have stakes in the unstable Balkans. We do see our advancement as an investment in the stability of the region. We do see that we are sending a message, NATO is sending a message, EU will be hopefully sending a message to the other countries in the region that compromises, good policy, courage, political courage pays off and moves the countries forward. So we do not expect that any of the countries in the regions will be interested in actually creating an obstacle. It was very interesting in the ratification process, and by the way, all of the countries sitting here have already ratified the treaty, and I thank them for the support. But the first ones to ratify the agreement were the countries from the region, our imminent neighbors, our close allies, and this would have been impossible to foresee just 15 years ago. So it says that with all the problems of the Balkans, the region has moved forward in an incredible manner. And we do hope to be a catalyst for the right policies and the right developments.
A catalyst for the right developments in the region, Western Balkan. We'll take a couple more questions. We have a little bit over 10 minutes to go. The gentleman right there, please introduce yourself, and then I'm coming to you in the back.
Jonathan Isle from the Royal United Services Institute in London. Question directly to our German colleague on this panel. You rightly referred to the large amount of cash that the German government has allocated, increased to defense expenditure. However, you do know that there are many people inside the coalition that doubt whether the 2% target is actually binding or a formal commitment, or whether it could ever be reached by the German government. So a difficult question, I know, but a simple one. Do you believe that the 2% is binding on the German government, and do you believe you're going to reach it?
We've touched upon this in the past here, but about the binding question,
yes,
the legality.
That's quite difficult for a military to answer, but for me, I think it's a coalition contract. That's the 1.5 in 2024 is for me the basis for planning. And we have not stopped planning this. We have only one plan, and that's dedicated on this 1.5%, and then the steady increase towards 2% whenever this comes. But I think you referred rightly. I think we all cross our fingers that the coalition is prolonging and future governments will stick to it. But I only can tell you as a military, my plan, my capability plan, which has an endurance till 2032, is based on exactly these figures in budget.
And the US president will undoubtedly remind you every day of it until in office. Go right ahead.
Christian Fraser, BBC News. I hate to bring up the Brexit word, but I'm going to do anyway. I just wonder whether the panel is concerned what Brexit might do in terms of procurement, in terms of integrated EU defence strategy, what challenges it poses into the future.
All right, who wants to take that Brexit question? You want to take that, Minister?
I think, yes, I try start at least. I think that because it's a very broad picture, I think that Brexit, it's a big challenge, and also in the field of the security and defense. If it happens, we will miss the UK in the European Union, also concerning its military might strength. But I am optimist that the UK will remain engaged also militarily in Central Europe. We share with the UK our foreign policy goals. We understand the threat Russia creates. Therefore, we will be cooperating in the future. Indeed, Poland established already some institutional framework for conducting close relations with the UK after Brexit. One of them is Quadriga meetings, regular meetings of foreign and defense ministers from the two countries to coordinate our policy. I think that the role of NATO will grow, because UK will remain a member of NATO. When you look at the enhanced forward presence, so currently there are 4 framework nations, US in Poland, Germany in Lithuania, then Canada and UK. So after Brexit, 3 of them will be out of Europe. So the capability of European Union will decrease. But it will definitely remain one of key players in the field of security, having being a Security Council, UN Security Council member, having nuclear weapons will play a very important role. And definitely we are for very close cooperation with the UK after Brexit, also in the field of procurement. You asked that questions, and cooperation in development new weapons and have them on board.
NATO, obviously a topic that evokes a lot of reaction, both on Slido but also in the audience. Unfortunately, we are slowly running out of time. My apologies. I've seen a few hands up. Unfortunately, we're wrecked for time. But I do want to take the opportunity, if he's so inclined, to involve General Todd Walters. You've listened very intently, very carefully to what the ministers and can we have a microphone here? Dignitaries have been saying up until now about the current state of the alliance. What has struck you the most? What is something that you would like to chime in on?
Well, thank you. Thank you. One of the things we weren't able to get to in the questions and answers session that I had earlier was the fact that from a NATO military perspective, we're very, very focused on the comprehensive deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area. And I think what we heard from the Admiral and what we heard from the Minister were several examples of the comprehensiveness of the contributions of the NATO nations, whether it's activity that occurs on the periphery in supporting activities in Afghanistan, all the way to that same nation supporting what takes place in the Baltic area, all the way to that nation doing the appropriate things to make sure that we shore up our ability to better deter and better defend in the Arctic. Mm-hmm. Very, very powerful. Great contributions from all of our nations. And I think we'd all agree that we'll never be as aligned or as transparent as we would prefer, but the reason we get frustrated is the fact that our job is to wake up every morning and improve our alignment and transparency. Thank you.
You're basically on the same team, but do you have a question? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
I was going to ask the Admiral if he could just talk about a couple things that his nation does with respect to comprehensiveness, and I think maybe just touching on EFP all the way down to the activities in the old RC North would be worth a quick discussion.
Yes, I think.
Thank you, General.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think you know that Todd and me, we are very hard working on the enduring enhanced forward presence thing. I think we have troops, not constantly, but 12 months in a year. But every 6 months we rotate them. So we just learn how to bring my main battle tanks or the armored fighting vehicles to the Baltic states, which gives us a big advantage. I think we have not done this for years. And let me probably explore a little bit on the Joint Support and Enabling Command, which is, I think, a command which is belonging to the force structure, but will be, I think that Jordan and I, we are quite clear, will be under your command even in peacetime when it comes to 3-4 topics, either to the logistic topics. But I think the question we have to tackle, and I think that's probably easy to understand, is when a tank arrives in Amsterdam, he has to go somewhere at the surroundings of Europe. So he has to cross several border lines. So we have implemented a plan, which is the mobility plan. And I think we started this, General, I think 1.5 years ago, and we are now in the middle. The Netherlands are working quite hard with it, and we have implemented now this command in the middle of Germany, and we are ready to support American troops coming to Europe next year. So I think it's a success story, and I think what we are very well working together is on the Readiness initiative, which is, I think, a major topic. I think when you ask us on and the Baltic states, I think you need forces which are ready in case of. And I think we just implemented this 30-30-30 plan, which is called the Readiness initiative, almost 1 year ago. And now we had a fourth generation conference just this week, I think. And it turned out probably that could be better, but I think we have a very significant number of forces now dedicated beside the readiness, the NATO readiness force, which is called the VJTF. So I think for me, and the question is asked, are we too positive? I think we have done a tremendous amount of work together, discussing for sure, yes, and complaining about our budget, yes, but we are, I think, on a good way.
We are on a good way, and we are on the way to the end here, at least as far, not NATO, thankfully, but certainly this panel. Now, we started this panel with an assessment of how you would describe the first 70 years of NATO. To end up, and perhaps we start this time in the reverse order, starting with the Admiral. What is the word? What are the words that come to your mind when you not look back at the past 70 years, but if you look ahead? What describes the future of NATO?
I think what strikes me is the challenges we have. I think now we are talking about tanks, about battalions, but I think we referred yesterday. I think we really have to think about demography as well. That affects my personnel. We have to think about cyber, because probably war which will come is not main battle tanks against main battle tanks. It's probably totally different. And I think we have to think this very carefully, not in a hurry, but we have to think this through to the end.
Ambassador Ildem, what are the words that come to your mind when you look ahead?
Well, I already mentioned the global power competition, asymmetric threats, and we are expanding our capacities when it comes to dealing with threats of hybrid and cyber. I'm sure that non-state actors will be on the rise, so we have to focus on terrorism in all of its forms. And also we need to be fit for purpose, so continuation of our adaptation process would be key for our continuation in our successful journey.
Minister Shekerinska, obviously you weren't part of NATO in the previous 70 years, but it looks like you're going to be part of NATO in the future. So therefore, very actual, of course, this question to you. What are the words that come to your mind?
New challenges and the same goal, the same stability. Because we are discussing whether the club is equally united, as it was in the beginning, I do believe that when you have a club that is already 70, if there are no heated debates, it's probably dead. So I do believe that in the times of polarization, as it was mentioned today, it is more attractive when we come up with the issues on which we disagree. But if you go back to the table and you see the issues on which everyone agrees, after several ministerial meetings, I was surprised by the dichotomy of what actually happens behind closed doors and how the public perceives it. So a bit more optimism, and I think the alliance has earned even more satisfaction with its results. At the end, on top of the 430 initiatives, we do hope this year will be marked also by the 5th 30, which is the 30th member.
Optimism, and right there, pick it
So
up.
if you have one missing, you can always use us as a...
Very well. We'll start the negotiations right after this panel over coffee. Now, Minister Čaputović, this panel is titled NATO at 80, so already we're looking ahead 10 years. What goes through your mind when you hear that?
I think that when I look for keywords would be preparedness, being prepared, adaptation, I agree with that, and also modernization, and the challenge to stay united as a Western community. It is a challenge, and we have to be united in order to face the new challenges and threats.
Unity is key in order to sustain the success of NATO, the previous success of 70 years, and of course face and battle the many challenges that this alliance will surely face, ladies and gentlemen. Topic that is very current due to the 70th anniversary and promises to stay current due to the many challenges ahead. Minister Šekerinska, Minister Čaputović, Ambassador Ildem, and Vice Admiral Rühle, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. This is your applause. Thank you so much. Now, NATO, of course, is one alliance that faces many challenges. Another country, another region, of course, is Asia and Korea in particular. And the Korea panel will start right away without any break and will be moderated by my colleague, Justin Vogt, who will take over now in just a second.
Good morning, everyone. Can I ask you please to take your seats? Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Justin Vogt. I'm the Managing Editor of Foreign Affairs. Welcome to GLOBSEC. We are very, very lucky to be joined this morning by the Foreign Minister of South Korea, Madam Kang Kyung-hwa. We're looking forward to having a good conversation. I think everyone is settled, and I think we ought to just jump right in. First, Madam Minister, I know that you're in the region now partially for reasons that are a bit sad or tragic, and I know that you wanted to say a couple words about that.
Yes, I was in Budapest just last weekend because of this terrible sinking of a boat that carried 33 of our national and 2 Hungarian sailors, and we're still searching for bodies and trying to help the families who are now there, but just hugely grateful for the fullest cooperation we're getting from the Hungarian authorities in terms of the search and also in terms of the investigation, and also to the neighboring countries for the support of equipment, of personnel that this is required, and the outpouring of message of sympathy and condolences. And so just very grateful. And we're hoping to get to the very last count of our nationals.
I'm afraid we have to move from that topic to another topic, which can sometimes produce a bit of anxiety or even grief, which is relations on the Korean Peninsula.
Yes.
I'm hoping that you might be able to give us your sort of take on the current status of the negotiations over the North's nuclear program. I'm particularly interested in knowing if there are any reasons for optimism, because I think the prevailing conventional wisdom is that things have reached a bit of a stalemate or a deadlock.
Yes, well, I think post Hanoi, and Hanoi was late February, and it's been over 3 months. Things have stalled, but I think the Hanoi ended without agreement, but both sides clearly understanding where the other side was coming from, the United States, North Korea. So I think the where we are is that we have a very good foundation for really significant progress when the two sides meet again. There is strong commitment on both sides at the highest level from President Trump himself and the chairman himself to re-engage, to see where progress can be made on the 4 pillars of agreement that was reached in their first summit in Singapore. The 4 pillars being, better leaving hostilities behind and building better relations between the U.S. and North Korea, working towards a lasting peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, North Korea committing to complete denuclearization, and the two sides agreeing to some confidence-building measures, more specifically the return of MIAs, remains from North Korea to the United States. So it's a very big package of issues that the two sides need to further engage. What happened in Hanoi was the American side wanted to engage on all 4 pillars, but the chairman Kim came wanting to engage only on just that one pillar, which is denuclearization, in return for some corresponding measures from the United States, including sanctions relief. And I think the approach didn't quite meet because the United States, and we fully support this approach, we need to take a comprehensive approach this time. Past approaches to dealing with the nuclear issues have been, piecemeal. And given the advanced stage of the North Korea's nuclear missile stage program and what this means for the global security, given North Korea's need for a lot of support from the outside, security guarantees as well as economic support, we need this time to take a comprehensive approach. And we can take that approach because of the strong engagement at the highest levels on all sides, the U.S., North Korea, and South Korea as well. So, somehow the North Koreans came with a wanting to discuss just one pillar and one piece of that pillar. But after Hanoi, I think North Korea has a much better understanding of what is expected when the U.S. engages at the highest level on the nuclear issue. So I'm, optimistic, pessimistic. Diplomacy is not about optimism, pessimism. It's about working with what you have and trying to advance the dialogue. We do need the dialogue. We do need engagement. North Korea's nuclear program has tools, 2 tools that we are working, and that is the pressure and the sanctions, and that's important. And we are, committed to fully implementing the sanctions until we are assured of North Korea's complete denuclearization. But that's not going to bring about denuclearization. There needs to be continued dialogue engagement. So these 2 sides have to go together. So, at the bottom line, we need to keep the engagement and the dialogue. How else are you going to come to some kind of agreement that get North Korea to act upon its denuclearization agreement?
You mentioned the commitment on both sides at the highest levels. I'm curious what, from your position, you've made of the Trump administration's approach to this. The commitment that we've seen, for example, the president has made these these sort of public statements of almost fondness or admiration for Kim Jong-un, which I think has been surprising to a lot of American observers. How has that looked from your point of view?
Well, I think that's an indication of the President Trump's real intention to solve this issue once and for all. I think he sees this as perhaps as one of his most important legacies on the global security agenda. And I think he has confidence that he can bring this to a lasting solution. And of course, that's welcome news to us because, you know, this is, in the first instance, our part of the world. This is about our peaceful future. And so we really appreciate that. And that has never happened before. I mean, to have the President of the United States so focused on the issue. So, and we want to make the most of this, the momentum that this has created.
Let me turn to the other side. I'm curious, one of the puzzles in this situation that I think confuses people is sort of trying to understand North Korea's intentions or interests as they define them. And I'm wondering, I know that your job is generally to communicate and define South Korea's, the ROK interest, but I'm wondering what is the South Korean view of Kim and the broader regime's sense of their own interests or their own intentions? You mentioned that they wanted to just narrow the scope. What does that indicate about the broader strategy that they have from your point of view?
Well, I think North Korea is a country that's very uniquely closed by its own choice, and it has a very different way the bureaucracy works, a very different way it engages with the outside world. So that has to be taken into account when trying to read any intentions. But there is a pattern after you've studied, and you can read between the lines. So, for example, they recently test-fired short-range projectiles and missiles in early May, and naive observers will say, "Oh, this is provocation," and this is their indication that they're breaking off the dialogue. Actually, if you analyze the behavior and the statements that accompany that, it's an indication that they really want to come back to the table.
Why is that? Why do you interpret it that way?
Because the test, it was very measured in a way so as not to directly provoke Japan or South Korea. It was in their own territorial waters. It was measured to a certain distance. The statements that accompanied that was devoid of any hostile, nasty language about South Korea or the United States, unlike in the past when these statements came out. And so it was a measured action accompanied by measured rhetoric, and that's very different from their previous behaviors. It's almost an art form as to reading intentions into North Korea. But at the end, what you need to do is to bring them back to the table and get them to commit to concrete action on denuclearization. And what they came to Hanoi was not insignificant. The North Korean leader came saying he's ready to dismantle the whole of the Yongbyon complex, which is a very big chunk of their nuclear program. Now, you can argue, is that 50%, 80%? Experts differ, but it is, at the end, a key part of their nuclear program. And when he comes to say, I am ready to get rid of all of that in return for, he is ready to take some very chunky actions. What he had asked in return was, basically at the end, a lot of the sanctions relief.
Right.
And you can't agree to that unless he is ready, he's prepared to talk about the whole picture of their nuclear missiles program and the whole picture of what the United States and the world can give them in return.
Let me push you a little bit on one of the underlying assumptions of this whole topic, which is that I think most Western countries and members of the alliance sort of come to this, and the idea is, well, the goal here is denuclearization. North Korea should not have nuclear weapons. The fact is that we've now been living in a world in which North Korea has nuclear capability for more than a dozen years. Can you explain from your point of view why it is so important that North Korea not have nuclear weapons? And I know that sounds like a strange question, but I think it's only because it's one that people generally don't ask anymore. And I think it's important to try to keep it in mind. What is the reason? What makes North Korea so uniquely dangerous, considering that Mao's China had nuclear weapons, Stalin's Soviet Union had nuclear weapons?
At the end of the day, and you may, this is a basic pillar of the global security regime is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. And according to that treaty, there are 5 countries that are legitimately nuclear power states, the P5s. The rest have pledged not to develop nuclear weapons in return for support in utilizing nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. That's the basic deal. Huh? And all countries have signed on to that. North Korea signed on to that, and as it developed its nuclear it had decided to withdraw. Right. That withdrawal has not been accepted so far. So to say, okay, well, North Korea, you're advanced, we'll let you become a nuclear, it undermines that whole fundamental basis of the global security regime. So there's no way the global community can formally acknowledge North Korea as a nuclear power state.
Even though we've accepted other nuclear states since then. I mean,
Nope. India and Pakistan have not signed on to the NPT. Israel takes an NCND approach, right? So there have been former nuclear power countries that have voluntarily given up, such as Kazakhstan and Ukraine.
Right.
South Africa was on its way, but then also voluntarily given up. So North Korea is the one country in the world that was a member of the NPT, and that as he developed in defiance of this regime, the non-proliferation regime has said we're withdrawing. So to acknowledge, to accept that defiance and say, okay, we'll let you, this is just not, this would undermine the whole NPT regime.
And aside from undermining that bit of international law, from a practical standpoint, do you feel, and do you think the majority of South Koreans feel that they would be appreciably safer if the North had no nuclear weapons, considering the vast conventional arsenal that it also has?
No. My government is very clear. We are all for a non-nuclear Korean Peninsula. We don't have any. In the past, we used to have some tactical weapons deployed with the U.S. forces. Not anymore. We are absolutely clear that the safest way for Korean Peninsula to be safe is to be completely nuclear-free. Even in South Korea, there are voices who say, "Oh, we have to go nuclear as well," and I think that could be a immediate reaction. Maybe you could feel, okay, this will protect us. But look at North Korea. Is it more safe because it has nuclear weapons capabilities?
Well, arguably, the regime may feel that way. They may feel that it's a deterrent, and that deterrence is holding.
I think, but the price of that has been the global community basically sanctioning it, and its economy suffering because the global community will not let it go down that road. So. My country is a model citizen when it comes to global norms. We are a very strong advocate of non-proliferation issues, and we take active part in all global endeavors to fight non-proliferation. And so to say that, oh, well, in our case, because this is completely against our logic, completely against our view of what we want to achieve in terms of permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula. We are still in an armistice situation. What defines the legal relationships on the Korean Peninsula is an armistice that was signed at the end of the Korean War in 1953. We still have not replaced that with a formal peace treaty.
Right.
And so our push is both to get North Korea to denuclearize, but also to start this process of negotiating a peace treaty with the signatories of the armistice. But to get to full peace, to peace treaty, we need to get North Korea completely denuclearized.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the other countries in the region, Japan and China in particular. South Korea has a very interesting and complex relations with both of those powers. I'm particularly interested in hearing about, one thing we've noticed throughout the world recently, but in this region in particular, is that in the publics in both of those countries, there's been a rise in a sort of nationalist sentiment. And I'm wondering, from a foreign policy point of view, do you think that that has an effect on the governments in those countries and their ability to negotiate with you, to have relations with you? What effect does that sort of rising nationalist sentiment have on your ability to do business with those countries?
Well, I think the rise of public voices, I think it's the same everywhere. I think in South Korea also, I wouldn't call it nationalist. I think it's a very active civil society that is very demanding of government.
Especially in recent years, yeah.
In recent years, and of course we have a very painful history of colonization and wartime atrocity with Japan, and so there's a lot of public demand that we get that right. We come to terms with that past, and so yes, that does place a lot of demand and pressure and sets a lot of parameters. But I think that's the story of life of foreign policy management in this world of increasing transparency and people having knowledge at the tip of their fingers, with all sources of information available. But it also means a public that's much more knowledgeable about the details of these issues. But I think we have to deal with that. It's the reality of life. This isn't the 60s where you could do backroom deals and get away with it. We can't do that anymore.
We've talked now about North Korea, we've talked about Japan and China. I want to ask you a bit about your own country and actually your own sort of place within it. You're the first female foreign minister of South Korea. There's a perception, I don't know if it's totally accurate, but it's certainly a perception that exists that even more so than in other countries, the South Korean foreign policy or national security establishment is an old boys club, that it is very male dominated, and that the wider society, in fact, is fairly patriarchal. Tell me a little bit about how you navigated that and how you continue to navigate it.
I try hard. Yes, I am.
Succeeded.
I am the first woman and the 38th foreign minister. And I've been, I think, just about two years into my job. I'm the foreign minister, but my vice ministers and all of my deputy ministers are male. But at the entry level, it's increasingly more female. So you get to the entry, and as they come up to about the director's level, lots of very capable women diplomats. And I think that level of more women's presence will naturally grow higher and higher. But so far, yes, I am the only woman in this National Security Council meetings. I'm the only woman in a lot of these discussions on security matters. But I think I do bring into my job what perhaps other foreign ministers didn't have, which is my 10 years experience in the United Nations, where on a daily basis you deal with the whole of the global community through your own prism. For 6 years it was human rights. For 4 years it was humanitarian assistance. And the joy of working in the UN, warts and all, is that you truly deal with the whole of the global community through your specialty area. So I bring a lot of knowledge about the world into this job that other foreign ministers didn't have, especially on the workings of the United Nations and the Security Council. And the Security Council engagement on specifically the North Korean nuclear issue is a very, very important part of this this challenge.
We're going to come to the audience for a second for questions. So those of you who have questions, think about them, formulate them, make sure that there's a question mark at the end of them, and I'll come to you in a sec. Very quickly, though, I wonder whether you have any advice for young women just starting out in South Korea or in other countries where it's been historically hard for them to break through as diplomats or as policymakers. Generally speaking, what's your advice for them? What should they do, not do?
Well, it's I don't underestimate the daily difficulties of especially if you have a young family. It's a struggle. So part of my job is to taking small steps. Whether it's to make life a bit easier for my junior colleagues with families, whether women and men.
Right.
Because I think that's critical for women to have prosperous careers in the diplomatic service or for any other services. But for them individually, I just say, be patient, look at the long term. And at the end, if you need to make a choice, the choice has to be on the side of the family. I had always done it. I have no qualms in giving the same advice to my young junior colleagues.
All right. Questions? Sir, tell us who you are, and we'll get you a microphone. And please do ask a question. Thank you.
I'll do both. Jonathan Isle from the Royal United Services Institute. Let me return you to the management of North Korea. One of the criticisms of your administration is that both you and the President are so wedded to the idea of a dialogue that literally nothing Pyongyang will do would persuade you to cut off the dialogue. So, I know it's a difficult question. What are the limits that you will not go under? And what is the status of the THAAD deployment that your President initially started by saying he doesn't want and is now supposedly examining?
Well, I think our commitment to dialogue is a very principled one. We started the dialogue. We offered the dialogue, but with a clear message that every provocation, significant provocation, will be met with further sanctions. And that was the story until the end of 2017. Since then, they have come to the dialogue table, and I think that message remains still very clear. If there is significant provocation, that throws water on everything. The recent testing of the short-range projectiles and missiles didn't reach that degree. You can debate about whether they were ballistic or not. We're still analyzing. I think still there's details to be analyzed. But I think the U.S. And us, after analyzing, we've decided to take a cool-headed approach about this. We said this doesn't deserve breaking the momentum for dialogue. But if the provocation reaches a certain limit and that cannot be tolerated, clearly it goes back to more pressure. And so I don't agree that this is dialogue at all expenses. It also very much depends on North Korea's behavior. THAAD, they're deployed. The THAAD is deployed, and I think we are now in the process of doing some environmental assessments on what this means. I don't have the details, so it's there. The president, during the campaigning, had lots of reservations about this, but once in office, and especially faced with, provocations after provocations from North Korea with missiles, and clearly decided that this had to be deployed.
Okay, we had another question here in the middle. Can we have a microphone here, please? The gentleman with his hand up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Japanese ambassador to Slovakia. First of all, I really appreciate Korean foreign minister come here because this is a GLOBSEC meeting, but every year most of the discussion is Atlantic, European, so I'm just joking, this is not GLOBSEC, this is Atlantic SEC or European SEC, but we have a session on Asia and a very high-ranking politician from Asia, Republic of Korea. I appreciate it very much. My question was a comment to the foreign minister is that you mentioned about, threat of the development of the nuclear, the weapon by, North Korea from the viewpoint of the non-proliferation. But I think that the North Korean issue is not only regional issue, Asian issue, but a global issue, because now North Korea is developing not only the nuclear warhead, but also ballistic missile. And I think that it's a combination of the nuclear warhead and ballistic missile. That missile can reachable not only to the United States, but also to Europe here. As most of the audience in this room is European, and I want to ask you how you assess that the North Korean issue for the Europe and the European people. Thank you.
I completely agree that yes, it is a global security threat. The testing of, I think the testing have stopped since the late 2017, but the ones immediately before the stopping was ICBM range yes. So clearly, the reach is now something that threats all in the global community, which is why the Security Council has adopted a series of sanctions resolutions, 10 altogether, beginning with their first nuclear test in 2006. This is unheard of for the Security Council to take such robust sanctions decisions on any country. So I think that alone is an indication that it's a global concern, and therefore the efforts to get North Korea to denuclearize has also to be a global effort. And I think it has been. I think the sanctions, if anything is forceful in the United Nations, it's the Security Council decisions taken under Chapter 7. Any decision taken by the Security Council under Chapter 7 is mandatory in all member states. And there is not many Council actions that are of that nature, but the Council to have taken 10 sanctions decisions under Chapter 7 is an indication of the gravity of this issue.
Well, on that note, I'm afraid we're going to have to close our session. It's good to end on a nod towards global cooperation and the need for more of it. I'd like to thank you, Madam Foreign Minister. Thank you so much for your time. Everyone, the next session here is on the future of sustainability. It's in half an hour, and there are refreshments in the lobby. Please join me in thanking the Foreign Minister for her time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.